Imagine the sound of 200,000 people. It's not just noise, it's a physical force. It's a collective vibration that rattles the very concrete of the earth beneath your feet. It is the sound of a nation claiming its destiny. For the fans gathered in Rio de Janeiro on July 16th, 1950, that sound was the roar of an impending coronation. Brazil was ready. The world was ready. But then the audio cuts not to a fade out, but to a sudden, absolute, and chilling silence. A silence so profound it felt like the air itself had been sucked out of the Maracanã. That is the moment where football history split in two. That day, Brazil didn't just lose a championship match, they lost their sense of self. People call it the Maracanazo, the blow of the Maracanã, but calling it a blow feels too small, almost dismissive. It was an amputation. Today, we aren't just talking about a game from the archives. We are investigating how a single 90-minute stretch of grass created a trauma that has haunted the most successful nation in football history for 76 years. Why is it that even today, in the era of data, analytics, and global stars, Brazil still cannot seem to outrun the ghost of 1950? To understand the tragedy, you have to understand the environment of 1950. Post-war Brazil was a country in search of a soul. They weren't just building a stadium, they were building a monument to their own inevitable rise as a global power. The Maracanã wasn't just a place to play, it was a cathedral of human ambition. It was the largest stadium on the planet, and it was filled to bursting. You look at the footage from that day, and it looks like a scene from another dimension. Thousands of men in white suits and fedoras, the sun beating down, the sheer density of the crowd. This team, Zizinho, Ademir, Jair, they weren't just footballers. They were treated like matinee idols, the personification of a new, confident Brazil. The hubris was total. The Brazilian press had already printed the victory headlines. The mayor of Rio de Janeiro had already given his victory speech before the referee even blew the starting whistle. They were going to be the kings of the world, and there was no backup plan. They had even gone so far as to commission a victory song, an anthem that was never played, a piece of music destined to sit in a drawer for decades. The players were so confident that the championship medals were already minted, already engraved with their names. Imagine that pressure. You aren't just playing for a trophy, you are playing to fulfill a pre-written history. You are playing to justify the pride of 200,000 people inside the stadium and millions more listening on the radio. It wasn't sport, it was a state function. But across the tunnel, there was something else. Uruguay. If Brazil was the golden child, Uruguay was the hardened, cynical veteran. They were a team that understood that in the high-stakes world of international football, beauty is often the first thing to be sacrificed for a result. Their captain, Obdulio Varela, was a man carved from granite. He knew that the home crowd was the greatest asset, but also the greatest liability. He told his teammates a simple, brutal truth. If we don't humiliate them, they will humiliate us. He wasn't playing for the fans, he was playing to break the spirit of the people watching, and he knew exactly how to do it. The game starts, and Brazil is, as expected, liquid gold. They move with a grace that seems almost unfair. When the first goal goes in for Brazil, the roar is so loud it is said you could hear it miles away from the stadium. The dream was happening, but look closer at what happens next. Varela, the Uruguayan captain, does something subtle that most historians overlook. He picks the ball out of the net, he walks, he doesn't run, he argues with the referee about an offside call that didn't exist, he ties his laces, he kills the energy, he drags the rhythm of the game down into the mud. He is stripping the excitement away from the Brazilian players. He is forcing them to exist in a state of hesitation. Here is the retention pulse for those of you wondering if this is just a story about a bad day at the office. Statistically, Brazil was the better team that day. They had 30 attempts on goal compared to Uruguay's 5. They were dominating the geography of the pitch. But football isn't played on a spreadsheet. It is played in the psychology of the human mind. As the minutes tick by, you can see the fluidity in the Brazilian players' legs turn into stiffness. Every time a pass went slightly astray, the crowd would moan. That moan is a dangerous sound. It's the sound of a parent's disappointment. The Brazilian players weren't playing against 11 men in blue shirts. They were playing against the terrifying, suffocating expectation of their own people. They were paralyzed by the fear of being the generation that failed. The equalizer in the 66th minute is where the house of cards begins to collapse. A cross comes in, a header, and suddenly the ball is in the net. The stadium doesn't go quiet, it goes into a state of shock. There is a difference between a quiet stadium and a stadium in shock. A quiet stadium is peaceful, a stadium in shock is a vacuum. You can see the Brazilian players looking up into the stands, their eyes wide, searching for an answer that isn't coming. The invincible myth was evaporating in real time. Now, let's get into the tactical breakdown of the final decisive moment, the 79th minute. This is the moment that changed the sociological landscape of a nation. Brazil is pushing forward. They are overcommitted. They don't know how to play for the draw because, in their minds, they are not a team that draws. They are a team that wins. And here we have the tragedy of Moacyr Barbosa, the goalkeeper. People remember him as the man who failed, but analyze the frame by frame. He was playing a specific tactical role. He was covering the cross because that was where the danger was supposed to come from. But Alcides Gigia, the Uruguayan winger, did the impossible. He saw a gap that shouldn't have been there, or perhaps he just gambled on a shot that most players wouldn't take. He fires the ball into the near post. Barbosa, anticipating the cross, takes a tiny, almost microscopic step to his left. That step cost him his career, his reputation, and his peace of mind. The ball hits the net. No one celebrated. The Uruguayan players were actually stunned by what they had just done. The silence that followed was so thick you could cut it with a knife. It was the sound of a country realizing that its destiny had been stolen, and in the center of that void was Barbosa. The legacy of that goal is what we really need to examine. The aftermath was a total purge. Brazil discarded their white shirts forever. They decided that the white kits were cursed, that they lacked the soul of the nation. They introduced the iconic yellow jerseys we see today, a desperate attempt to reset the national consciousness. But the trauma didn't go away, it just found a new host. They scapegoated Barbosa with a level of vitriol that is frankly terrifying. He wasn't just a player who made a mistake. He was treated like a social pariah. He spent the rest of his life being followed by that one moment. He famously recounted a story of a woman in a grocery store pointing at him and telling her child, "Look at that man. He is the one who made all of Brazil cry." Imagine living for 50 years with a national identity that sees you as a criminal for a sporting error. He died in poverty, a man who carried the heavy, crushing weight of a nation's disappointment until his very last breath. So, why does this matter to us in 2026 as we watch the current generation of superstars struggle with the same pressure? We treat football as a science now. We have GPS trackers, sleep coaches, data scientists, and mental health professionals on staff for every major national team. We think we have optimized the human element out of the game. But have we? When you watch the current Brazil squad or any team with a golden generation, you can still see that exact same hesitation, that same fear of the moan from the crowd. We have improved the equipment, but we haven't changed the human condition. The question that should stick with you is whether the burden has actually grown heavier. In 1950, the pressure was national. Today, the pressure is global, instantaneous, and relentless. A player today is scrutinized by millions of people on social media before they even get to the locker room after the final whistle. The invincible myth is harder to maintain than ever because the internet never forgets a mistake. When you look back at 1950, it is easy to see it as a black and white historical footnote. But look at the faces of the players on the pitch today when they are down by a goal in a high stakes tournament. You see the same look that was on Barbosa's face. You see the fear of becoming the next scapegoat. We have to ask ourselves, are we actually helping these players, or have we just moved the goalposts of expectation? Can a player ever truly be free on a football pitch when the weight of their country's entire identity is packed into their boots? Maybe the tragedy of 1950 didn't end because it was never really about the game. It was about the realization that football is a mirror. It shows us exactly what we fear about ourselves, the possibility of being less than we think we are. The Maracanazo wasn't just a loss, it was a lesson that vulnerability is the price of entry into the game. And that brings us to the core of our discussion today. We keep trying to build invincible teams, but maybe the real strength comes from accepting that the ghosts are always going to be there. So I have to ask you, and I really want to see your take on this in the comments. Do you think modern football players have more mental support to deal with this? Or is the pressure of the national identity actually heavier today than it was in 1950? Are we setting our players up to fail by expecting them to be perfect? Or is that pressure what makes the game worth watching in the first place? Let's get into the details below.